At exactly 0614 this morning, the USS Abraham Lincoln crossed the red line into the Strait of Hormuz. To Washington, this is a symbol of invincibility. To the IRGC commanders hidden in the Zagros Mountains, it is a $13 billion target practice. As President Trump orders this massive armada into a 30-mile-wide choke point, the math of war has officially flipped upside down. We are watching a nuclear fortress sail directly into a swarm of 3,000 suicide drones that cost less than the missiles designed to stop them. One mistake here doesn't just sink a ship. It crashes the global economy instantly. Is this the ultimate show of force, or did we just deliver 6,000 hostages to Iran's doorstep? The deployment of the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group to the Persian Gulf is not a routine patrol. It is a calculated gamble by the Trump administration to stifle the growing unrest in Tehran by holding a gun to the regime's head. But this move exposes a fundamental misunderstanding of modern naval warfare. To understand the stakes, you have to ask a simple question. What is a nuclear aircraft carrier actually designed to do? It is a blue water predator engineered to dominate the open ocean, destroying peer adversaries from hundreds of miles away while hiding behind the vastness of the sea. It is an instrument of standoff warfare, protected by layers of destroyers and the emptiness of the horizon. By ordering it into the suffocating confines of the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway that narrows to just 21 miles at its pinch point, Washington has effectively stripped the carrier of its greatest defense distance. We are witnessing the violent collision of two completely different doctrines. The Americans are playing 20th century chess, moving heavy invincible pieces to control the board. The Iranians are playing 21st century swarm tactics where the board doesn't matter and the pieces are disposable. This isn't just a deployment, it is a live-fire stress test for the entire concept of American naval supremacy. If a $13 billion ship can be neutralized or even scratched by a swarm of cheap fiberglass drones, the psychological impact would shatter the US Navy's global deterrence overnight. The definition of power has shifted from tonnage to saturation. The question is no longer about firepower, it is about processing speed. Can the Aegis Combat System solve a ballistic equation with 3,000 variables before the first warhead impacts the flight deck? The strategic backdrop for this confrontation is being written in blood on the streets of Tehran. As of February 2026, the Iranian regime is facing its most severe existential crisis since 1979, with widespread protests threatening to topple the mullahs. In response, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps IRGC has initiated a classic diversionary tactic: escalate external tension to unify the internal front. They have effectively turned the Persian Gulf into a hostage situation, threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz, the jugular vein of the global energy market, through which 20% of the world's oil flows every single day. On one side of this volatile equation sits the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. This is not just a ship, it is 4.5 acres of sovereign American territory, carrying 90 aircraft, including the F-35C Lightning II, and escorted by a phalanx of Arleigh Burke-class destroyers armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles. It represents the pinnacle of conventional warfare, a force designed to delete nations from the map. But on the other side, the IRGC Navy has prepared a welcome committee that completely ignores the rules of conventional engagement. They aren't fielding destroyers that the US Navy can track and sink. Instead, they have amassed a Mosquito fleet of thousands of Ashura and Tariq-class speedboats, armed with heavy machine guns, 107mm rockets, and suicide explosives. The geography dictates the engagement. The Strait of Hormuz is technically 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, but the navigable channels for a massive vessel like a carrier are only 2 miles wide in each direction. This forces the American Armada into a predictable, narrow kill zone, where their superior radar range is negated by the towering coastal mountains of Iran. The Abraham Lincoln is effectively a heavyweight boxer, stepping into a phone booth with 1,000 knife-wielding opponents. It doesn't matter how hard you can punch if you don't have the room to swing your arm. To understand the mechanics of this potential disaster, we must look at the technological mismatch defining the battlefield. The crown jewel of the American defense is the Aegis Combat System, integrated into the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanking the carrier. This system is effectively a localized God's Eye, using the massive SPY-1D and the newer SPY-6 radars to track over 100 targets simultaneously, from sea-skimming missiles to satellites in low orbit. Hovering above this defensive umbrella is the F-35C Lightning II. This jet isn't just a fighter, it is a flying server farm. Its sensor fusion capabilities allow it to suck in data from every drone ship and satellite in the theater, stitching together a perfect 3D picture of the battle space and distributing it to the entire fleet. In a conventional war against a peer adversary like China or Russia, this technological synergy is unbeatable. It is designed to see everything, categorize everything, and kill everything with surgical precision. But the Iranians aren't fighting a conventional war. They are weaponizing mathematics. Their strategy relies on the swarm, a doctrine that trades sophistication for pure volume. The threat isn't a single high-tech missile. It is 1,000 low-tech ones arriving at the exact same second. The IRGC has deployed thousands of fiberglass speedboats equipped with heavy machine guns and the new NASA-1 anti-ship cruise missiles. These boats are small, fast, and incredibly difficult for radar to distinguish from the choppy waves of the Gulf. More terrifying is the introduction of the Shahed 139, a loitering munition capable of swarming in coordination, and the recently unveiled 358 anti-aircraft missile, which is effectively a jet-powered telephone pole that loiters in the air waiting for an American helicopter or jet to fly past. This creates a nightmare scenario known as Asymmetric Math. The US Navy is forced to use Standard Missile 6 SM-6 interceptors, which cost nearly $4 million each to shoot down Iranian drones that cost roughly $20,000. It is a financial hemorrhage disguised as a tactical defense. The Abraham Lincoln's magazines are deep, but they aren't infinite. If Iran launches 500 cheap drones to bait the Aegis system into emptying its vertical launch cells, the carrier is left naked against the real heavy hitters, the ballistic missiles hiding in the mountains. The technology works perfectly, but the economics are fatal. You cannot win a war where you go bankrupt shooting down model airplanes with Ferraris. The countdown to catastrophe began at 0600 hours this morning, as the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group officially pierced the imaginary line separating the Gulf of Oman from the Strait of Hormuz. The mood inside the Combat Information Center, CIC of the lead destroyer, the USS Speedboats, shifted instantly from routine patrol to general quarters. In open water, a destroyer commander worries about submarines. In the strait, he worries about everything. The geography forces the formation into a single-file line, effectively stripping the fleet of its ability to maneuver. As the massive carrier committed to the channel, Iranian coastal radar stations immediately lit up, painting the American ships with high-frequency targeting beams. This wasn't just surveillance, it was a digital lock-on, a deliberate provocation telling the Americans, "We have you." But the tension didn't start at sunrise. It was ignited 48 hours prior, on February 3rd, 2,026 inches, an incident that the Pentagon tried to keep quiet. An F-35C Lightning II from the Lincoln's air wing was forced to engage a new variant of the Shahed 139 drone that was aggressively shadowing a commercial tanker. The engagement was historic, the first recorded air-to-air kill of a Swarm-class drone by a fifth-generation fighter in this theater. But the victory was Pyrrhic. The F-35C had to expend a $400,000A9X Sidewinder missile to destroy a $20,000 piece of fiberglass. The math was horrifying, and the IRGC commanders took note. The Americans were willing to shoot, but their ammunition was expensive and limited. By 1430 hours today, the situation escalated from electronic harassment to physical confrontation. As the carrier navigated the narrowest point of the strait, a wolf pack of 6 fast attack craft, believed to be operated by the IRGC Navy, emerged from the shadow of a passing Liberian supertanker. This is the human shield tactic at sea. By hugging the hull of a massive civilian vessel, the Iranian gunboats effectively blinded the American Aegis radar, which filters out large commercial traffic, to prevent screen clutter. They didn't appear on the threat scopes until they were just 3,000 yards off the Lincoln's starboard beam, well within the lethal range of their 107mm rockets. At 1435, the bridge-to-bridge radio crackled. The USS Speedboats issued a Level 1 warning. Unidentified surface craft, you are approaching a US naval warship. Alter course immediately, or you will be fired upon. The response from the Iranian boats was silence. Instead of turning away, they accelerated, cutting across the bow of the destroyer in a maneuver known as thumping. Inside the CIC, the tactical action officer had his finger hovering over the authorization key for the 5-inch deck gun. The optical sights on the Phalanx CIWS spun up, locking onto the lead speedboat. For 3 agonizing minutes, the fate of the Middle East rested in the hands of a 22-year-old fire controlman looking at a grainy monitor, waiting for a muzzle flash that would signal the start of a war. As the sun set at 1800 hours, the visual threat vanished, replaced by an electronic nightmare. The Aegis screens on the American destroyers suddenly bloomed with hundreds of ghost targets. The Iranians had activated land-based electronic warfare jammers flooding the strait with false signals. The radar showed a massive swarm of inbound missiles that didn't exist, forcing the American crews to frantically differentiate between digital phantoms and real threats. This is the fog of war in the digital age. The Lincoln is now operating in a state of sensor blindness, unable to trust its primary eyes, while thousands of real eyes in the Iranian mountains watch its every move. The sun has gone down, but the heat in the strait is rising by the second. The terrifying reality of this engagement is that the USS Abraham Lincoln isn't failing because its technology is broken. It is failing because its technology is too good for the fight it is in. This is the Ferrari in a demolition derby problem. The entire US naval doctrine is built around the concept of quality over quantity, designed to defeat high-end Soviet or Chinese threats with superior sensors and interceptors. But in the Strait of Hormuz, quality is irrelevant. The IRGC has successfully weaponized the concept of magazine depth. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, formidable as it is, carries roughly 96 missile cells. That sounds like a lot until you realize it is facing a swarm of 500 drones. Even if the Aegis system achieves a 1 to 100% kill rate, a statistical impossibility, the destroyer will run out of missiles long before Iran runs out of drones. And here lies the fatal flaw: a US destroyer cannot reload its vertical launch tubes at sea. Once those cells are empty, the billion-dollar warship becomes nothing more than a floating target with a 5-inch gun and a prayer. This is the brutal arithmetic of asymmetric warfare. Iran doesn't need to sink the carrier to win, they just need to bankrupt the defense. By forcing the Americans to expend their limited supply of SM-2 and SM-6 interceptors on cheap decoys, they strip the fleet of its ability to defend against the follow-on ballistic missile barrage. The geography of the strait further compounds this tactical suicide. In the open ocean, a carrier group uses defense-in-depth positioning destroyers 20 miles out to create multiple layers of protection. In the 30-mile wide strait, the formation is compressed. There is no depth. There is no reaction time. The keep-out zone has collapsed to zero. The Americans have brought a sledgehammer to kill a swarm of bees, only to realize that swinging a sledgehammer in a crowded room usually ends with you hitting yourself. The moment a single piece of shrapnel hits the hull of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the war moves from the Strait of Hormuz to the trading floors of New York and London. The consequences of this standoff are not measured in sunken tonnage, but in shattered economies. We are talking about a waterway that facilitates the transit of 21 million barrels of oil per day. If Iran mines the strait or successfully damages a US warship, maritime insurance giants like Lloyd's of London will immediately declare the Persian Gulf a war exclusion zone. This effectively halts all commercial tanker traffic instantly. The result? Oil prices wouldn't just rise, they would vertical launch, likely smashing past $200 a barrel within 48 hours. The global supply chain, already fragile, would suffer a stroke. Inflation would skyrocket, causing a recession that makes 2008 look like a market correction. Politically, President Trump has maneuvered himself into a strategic corner. By deploying the ultimate symbol of American power, he has removed the option of a proportional response. If the Abraham Lincoln retreats, the US looks weak, emboldening adversaries from Beijing to Moscow. But if the Lincoln stays and takes damage, the United States is forced into a full-scale war. There is no middle ground when a carrier is involved. A sunken destroyer isn't a military loss, it is a political mandate for regime change. The Iranians know this. They understand that by holding the strait hostage, they are holding a knife to the throat of the American voters' wallet. The Armada was sent to prevent a war, but by placing it in the world's most volatile choke point, Washington may have just removed the safety mechanism from the detonator. The world is now holding its breath, waiting to see if the cost of prestige is worth the price of the global economy. History teaches us that generals always fight the last war, but in the Strait of Hormuz, the United States is trying to fight the next war with last century's logic. The deployment of the USS Abraham Lincoln proves a terrifying lesson in the age of autonomous warfare. Gunboat diplomacy might officially be dead. We have spent decades and trillions of dollars building the ultimate sledgehammer, only to realize the enemy has become a mist that we cannot hit. The strategic mistake here wasn't the technology. The Aegis and the F-35 are engineering marvels. The mistake was the arrogance of believing that tonnage still equals intimidation. You cannot intimidate a microcontroller, and you cannot deter a swarm that is cheaper to build than it is to destroy. What we are seeing is the end of the era of the invincible aircraft carrier. If a $13 billion fortress cannot safely navigate a 30-mile channel without risking total destruction from a fleet of fiberglass boats, then the fundamental assumption of American power projection flawed. President Trump wanted to send a message of strength, but he may have inadvertently revealed the Achilles heel of the US Navy to the entire world. The chessboard has changed. The queens are vulnerable, and the pawns are now armed with cruise missiles. So here is the question you need to answer in the comments below. Is sending the Abraham Lincoln into the Strait of Hormuz a bold masterstroke to force Iran into submission, or is it a reckless gamble that exposes the US military to a humiliating defeat? Let me know what you think. And if you want to know exactly how that new Iranian drone-fired cruise missile actually works, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are tearing down its guidance system in the next video. Dismissed.